What's up, everybody out there in YouTube land? Brass2501 here. Okay, guys, we got another creepypasta. This one's by Blood Spilt Studio, and this is Needleteeth, an SFM creepypasta. Alright, so let's see what we got here. Alright, and go.
I don't often talk about the day that my little brother Caleb went missing when we were kids.
What?
After all, who would believe some kid spouting nonsense about an urban legend? The few adults that I did tell about it told me that I just had an overactive imagination. The therapist my parents took me to told them that my brain had probably just blocked out what had actually happened. A scary story that I had been told as a way to protect myself from the grief. But no matter what idea those people have about my questionable sanity, or even my involvement with my little brother's disappearance, I know what I saw that day. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't my brain.
Sorry, guys, still a little bit.
Grief.
My
little brother was taken by the creature that we told campfire stories about with our friends.
Donald Trump.
The literal monster in the closet. I may go the rest of my life without anyone ever believing me. But if I don't tell someone about what actually happened, I'm worried that I might start losing my mind entirely. Caleb and I were only a year apart in age when it happened. He was 10 and I was 11, and we had a pretty good relationship as siblings. Being so close in age, the two of us would spend a lot of time together and had a lot of the same friends. We often played with the other kids from our neighborhood, frequently wandering around the small patch of trees behind our backyard that we generously referred to as the forest. Our next door neighbors, Shelby and Nancy, were a little younger than us, but lived very close by, so we hung out with them a lot. We all lived in a relatively safe area, and were often allowed to stay out long past sundown, sometimes even making
looks like a really awkward smile
in our backyard at the edge of the trees, under the supervision of the oldest of the group, Dylan. Dylan was 15 at the time, and to Caleb, myself, and the other kids that we hung out with, he was basically an older brother to us all. The parents in the neighborhood trusted Dylan, and it wasn't uncommon for us to all settle down around a campfire, while Dylan told us scary stories or urban legends that he knew. The stories, for the most part, were ones that we were quite familiar with. The standard fare of Bloody Mary, Hookman, and other childhood classics.
Shrek.
Caleb and I usually laughed at the stories, or oohed and awed to play along and scare the younger kids. But that was until the night that Dylan had told us a story that none of us had ever heard before. That was the night that he told us the story about Needleteeth. As soon as Dylan mentioned the name, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end.
Have you ever heard the story
I felt
of
goosebumps all over my arms. I'd never heard this story before, and I could tell by the solemn and mischievous look on Dylan's face that this was going to be a good one. Caleb and I listened in, eyes wide with fear and excitement, not knowing that this would soon be the start of the most terrible chapter in both of our young lives. The way Dylan told it, the story of Needleteeth followed the fairly standard urban legend formula. Many years ago, back when our town was primarily just a collection of farms, some of the locals reported hearing what sounded like a baby crying on the edge of the forest. More often than not, when they would go investigate the source of the crying, the noise would stop abruptly, followed by the sound of someone or something, quickly but quietly, retreating back into the woods. Soon, people began reporting hearing the crying sound closer and closer to their houses. Eventually, reports would state that people were regularly hearing the crying right outside of their windows at night. But whenever they would go check to see where the noise was coming from, there would never be anything there. That is, until one night when a man was coming back late from a hunting trip and was putting his tools away in the shed when he heard the crying coming from over by one of his back windows. He quietly peeked out of his shed to see if he could catch a glimpse of whatever was creating that ominous sound. But what he saw surprised him, because it seemed as though a frail little old woman, wearing a woolen cloak, was hunched over below his window. She was weeping loudly with her face buried in her hands.
Creepy.
Though the sound did not match what he was seeing, he quietly crept over towards the figure, not wanting to call out to her and startle her in the darkness. When he felt that he was close enough to speak
Yeah, it's better
the
to
figure
creep up
without
on her
raising
and
his
startle her
voice,
then.
he softly asked if they were okay, or if they needed any help. That's when the creature turned its head to face the man, and he realized that the figure was not that of a frail old woman at all. The creature opened its mouth, wider than any animal the man had ever seen before, revealing hundreds of sharp, needle-like teeth. It then let out a screech, unlike anything that man had ever heard. He recoiled and fell backwards onto the ground, staring up in horror as the monster wailed and quickly, almost too quickly, scurried back into the forest. So quietly did it move that the sound of the night breeze was the only noise left that the man could hear. He quickly scrambled inside and told his family about what he had seen. The next day, he and some of the other men in town searched the woods for any trace of what had been seen the night before. The only thing they had found was a discarded cloak, along with some recently devoured animal carcasses. The town was on edge for a few days, but eventually everyone seemed to have forgotten about the incident, maybe even casting doubt as to whether it even happened at all. That is, until a few nights later, one of the town's baker's two young sons, named Joseph, was snatched away by something and taken off into the woods.
Oh, shit.
According to the baker's other son, Ezekiel, the two of them had been back behind their house chopping wood for the fire, when suddenly they heard what sounded like a baby crying, coming from behind the woodpile. Joseph, being slightly older and braver than Ezekiel, went to go investigate the sound. Ezekiel said that he saw two long, thin, pale gray arms reach out from behind the woodpile and snatch Joseph up, carrying him away, screaming, into the dark, inky blackness of the trees beyond. At this point in the story,
never
a few of the
investigate
younger
creepy
kids in our
sounds.
group squealed and begged Dylan to stop, insisting that the story had gotten too scary. Dylan chuckled and obliged, but not before warning us that they never caught the creature. And some people say that simply speaking its name is enough to cause it to actively hunt in the area again. Caleb jokingly punched Dylan's arm and told him to stop kidding around like that, warning that he would scare the younger kids too much, and they still all had to walk home in the dark. For a moment, just a brief moment, I saw a somber darkness in Dylan's eyes as he looked at Caleb, as if he was hiding something more about the story. But just a moment later, he was back to joking around and laughing again, standing and beginning to put out the campfire, telling us that we gotta meet back here next week for another scary story night. 15 minutes or so later, everyone had started to clear out from the area, and Caleb and I began cleaning up where we had all been sitting, putting away chairs, picking up trash, etc. Caleb laughed quietly and grinned at me. "Man, Dylan's story was sure creepy tonight, huh? Needleteeth? How does he come up with this stuff?" I half-heartedly chuckled, but a sick, creepy feeling immediately filled the pit of my stomach, and it felt like ice suddenly filled in my veins. A feeling that I can't quite describe took over my body, like a white-hot wave of fear and endorphins as the sound of a young girl crying began echoing from just beyond the edge of the tree line. Frozen in fear, I couldn't choke out the command to stop fast enough before Caleb set down what was in his hand and said, "Oh man, Shelby must have wandered off after the story. Don't worry, I'll go get her." Before I could squeak out a scream of horror, Caleb turned towards the trees, immediately greeted by a gray, lanky creature creeping out from behind a large oak tree. Time almost seemed to stop as Caleb stood frozen in fear. Both of us, wordlessly staring at the twisted creature's massive black eyes and gaping mouth full of hundreds of teeth. Its movements were so bizarre that it's hard to describe. Its arms and legs seemed to slither and squirm like a snake. Yet its torso and head remained rigid. The head especially seemed to pop and snap to the left and right, like its neck was breaking and setting over and over again. Its snake-like appendage descended upon Caleb, wrapped around him, and scooped him up from the ground as it let out a bone-chilling screech. I finally managed to call out my brother's name, but it was already too late. The long, pale gray arms had already wrapped around him tightly, in a nightmarish embrace, and the creature was already retreating back into the woods in a blur of black and gray. The sound of Caleb's screams as he was taken beyond the trees are something that I will never be able to purge from my memory. Of course, I ran home and demanded that my parents call for help, desperately explaining what had just happened. I could see right then on both of their faces that they didn't believe me, and that they thought this was just a joke, or my overactive imagination.
Oh, jeez.
That was until Caleb never came home that night.
No, now you're worried.
A few hours passed and my parents eventually called the police, worried that Caleb had wandered out into the trees and hurt himself somehow. But neither my parents nor the police ever found anything in those woods. To this day, my brother Caleb is still considered a missing person because his body was never found. But I know what really happened to my brother, even if everyone else doesn't believe it.
Coming for you, you little bastard. There you go, revenge. Revenge is indeed a dish best served cold. Pretty good. It's almost like the ones done by Plant. Anyway, guys, so what did you guys think of that? That was a pretty good one. If you enjoyed that, like this video, subscribe. Thanks to Server Blade, we've been seeing more of a revival of TF2 horror kind of stuff. Oh, that was good. That helps me feel a little better. Anyway, guys, like this video, subscribe, help this channel reach to 150,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and definitely click on the link to the original. Like the original, sub to Bloodspilt Studios. They haven't even reached 2K subs, so let's help get them up there, guys. They deserve it for stuff like this. This is good. Anyway, I will see you guys next time. Tune in every day for new content. Bye-bye.